Howdy ho! This is the Questioning Christianity podcast with Dan McClellan and the special I've got a special co-host this week, the legendary Barry White. Barry.
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
Sounded good, Rob.
Yeah, I'm trying to get over a little bit of a cold. Got my sexy voice going.
It sounds, well, I wasn't going to go quite that far, but it does sound good.
I apologize to all of our listeners that may be distracted by my voice.
This is Questioning Christianity. It's a podcast for folks like you who has questions about faith, questions and doubts, and we try to struggle with those. We don't often have the answers to those questions. We don't claim to, actually, but we do have a little bit of fun wrestling with some of these things, and hopefully we come away with some peace and a little bit better understanding at the end of the episode. Last week we talked about one of those existential questions of who am I, and we're going to continue that conversation this week by addressing the question of why am I here? You know, normally we do the questions that are submitted. We do that at the end of the show, but today, Rob, I thought we'd do that at the beginning, if that's cool.
That'll work.
All right. So I did have a question, so I'll pose it to you now. It says, you seem to think that we are not sinners by nature. How then do you explain the doctrine of total depravity? So this is in response to last week. We kind of presented those three different answers, possible answers.
Yeah.
The naturalistic answer, the religion answer, and then the, how did you describe the third one?
The biblical answer.
The biblical or the faith, yeah. Now, I don't know what total depravity is, so the question is, how do we explain the doctrine of total depravity? I'm hoping that that's something that you know about.
Okay, yeah, well, we can review that a little bit. Total depravity is this... It's called a doctrine. It's, of course, developed early on in the life of the church. It grew out of, I believe, from my understanding, St. Augustine's doctrine of original sin. And Augustine proposed that the original people who were on the earth sinned, and then sin is then, in a sense, inherited. There's something in our DNA that makes all of us sinners by birth. Total depravity then means basically the same thing, that in and of ourselves, we have no hope. We're totally depraved. I would not disagree with some of the thinking behind that. I certainly would not disagree with the idea that we all have a problem with sin. I think so far we're batting about 1,000 with that. Everybody has this problem with messing up and sinning. Let me go back. Maybe it'll help if I go back a little bit and review what we said last week. What I said is that this second answer to the question, who am I? Religion tends to give us the answer that you are a sinner.
That's right.
And that makes it really easy. That makes it simple for religion, because then the whole point of following that particular religion then is to appease God and to do something about your sin. And so then the religion builds a system around that. I'm not disagreeing that we sin. I'm not disagreeing that we are sinners. What I said last week was that our sinfulness is not our primary identity. I believe that doctrines like original sin and the doctrine of total depravity have moved us in the direction of sort of almost self-identifying as our primary identity, this handle of sinner, calling ourselves or thinking of ourselves primarily as just people who are sinners. I just said, that happens in Genesis chapter 3, but I think we need to go back to Genesis chapter 1, where the Bible says that we're created in the image of God, and therefore our primary identity is beloved children of God, not sinners.
Okay. Well, let me push back a little bit.
Okay.
These creation stories would be told and passed down from generation to generation and eventually written down, and you even, if I remember correctly, described them as poetry. Mm-hmm. So does that affect the interpretation here? That are we trying to draw kind of a literal truth from this piece of poetry as far as like the sequence in which God, creates us in His image and then we sin?
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to do, the human inclination is we're trying to put things in explainable language. So we build systems, and that's what we do as human beings. Augustine was trying to wrestle with the idea of the sin problem of the world and putting it in some kind of a system that could be explained, the idea of original sin. He gets, by the way, he gets that primarily from the Apostle Paul. I think that, like I said, I don't necessarily disagree with Augustine if Augustine is simply saying everybody has a problem with sin. I think that he's absolutely right.
And that original sin, is that referring to Adam and Eve's sin?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And then that we inherit that. As by one man sin entered into the world, Paul said, and death passed to all men.
Okay.
So I get that. I believe that before we decide that we're going to self-identify as sinners, we need to rethink that a little bit and go back and listen to what the poet said in Genesis chapters 1 and chapter 2, when the writer is describing this beautiful process whereby human beings come into this world as image bearers of God, that we're created in the image of God, that God, our Creator, forms us and then breathes into us the breath of life, that if anything, we're carrying the DNA of God in that sense. Let me use an example. It might help. Okay, there's some things that you can say about me that are true. I'm a white guy. Okay, and you may not know that, especially with the voice that I have tonight. I'm a white guy, and we could define that a little bit more. I'm a straight white guy. Okay, I can let any of those things that are true about me become my primary identity. I can let my sexual orientation become my primary identity, or I can let my ethnicity become my primary identity, and that's the way I think about myself. Or my gender become my primary identity, and that's the way I think about myself. All of those, if they're my primary identity, they can take me down some very destructive and dangerous paths, I believe.
How so?
Well, for instance, if I just think about myself as a white guy, and that's what I tend to emphasize, then I can become a person who elevates my ethnicity, my race to a status that's above other races. That happens. That's what we call white nationalism, and that's a problem in our country now. If I elevate my identity as a male, I can become misogynistic, and I can have disrespect for females. And so I think that this is part of some of the problems that we have. But if my primary identity is more consistent with the biblical narrative, that I am a person that is created in the image of God, that is beloved by God, I am indeed a beloved child of God, and that's my primary identity, then even though I might sin, I might mess up, and I need to be saved from that sin. We talked about that last week. I believe that what we need to remember is that we don't need to be saved from who we are. We need to be saved back to who we are. And so, for instance, the story that Jesus told of the prodigal son, there are two sons in the story. They're both sons. They've always been sons. Do they need to be saved? Yes. The prodigal son that goes away from home, he needs to come home and be saved. He needs to come back into the house with his father. The older son that never leaves home, does he need to be saved? Yeah, because at the end of the story, he's mad and he won't come in the house. But the story makes clear that their primary identity is that they're sons of the Father. So I'm not saying that we don't need to be saved. We do. But I think that we need to just get a healthier understanding of who we are fundamentally.
And what's the consequence of seeing oneself as a depraved sinner?
Well, self-loathing would be one. Hopelessness, recklessness, abandonment of any kind of sense of responsibility to be who I really am.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
There's all kind of different paths we can go down with that.
So that is kind of a quick review, I guess, of what we talked about last week, and we appreciate the question. Thanks for sending those in, and you can always send us questions either through our website or our Facebook page. Our website is questioningchristianitypodcast.com, and we're on Facebook at facebook.com/questioningchristianity. This week, we want to dive into why am I here? And Rob, this question is especially kind of on my heart and mind this week. As we're recording this, there's snow on the ground here in the South. That means life kind of shuts down as we know it.
Yeah.
And so I've been out of work as the office has been closed. I've had plenty of time to ask some of these existential questions. I have considered career changes and going back and getting different degrees. And really, it's all about trying to figure out the answer to the question, why am I here? Mm-hmm. And I can share a little bit more about some of the reasons why I'm asking that question, but in a little bit. But I think this is a question that just about everyone wrestles with at some time or another, if not their entire lives. Is this one that you feel like you've got a good handle on?
No.
Yeah.
I think I believe you're absolutely right, Dan. I think we do all wrestle with that question, but I think that maybe the way that we approach the question and wrestling with it will help us. I hope. I believe that we need to keep that question in connection with the first question.
Okay,
and remember that fundamentally it's a relational question. Who am I, and why am I here? Both connect with my relationship with my Creator. There is a line in an old document written in the 1600s called the Westminster Shorter Catechism.
I was reading that this morning.
Yeah, I know.
No, I've never heard of it.
It's a quick read.
Okay.
It's the shorter catechism. It's not the longer one.
Yeah. Well, who's got time for that one?
I know. But it is a tool that was once used to teach would-be disciples what it means to be followers of Christ. And there's a line in it that says, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. So that's the Westminster Catechism's answer to that question. Why am I here?
Is that the same group that puts on the dog show?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's why dogs are here.
I knew it sounded familiar.
I love the way your mind works. Dan.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's the answer to the question, you'll notice that's their answer to why am I here? It's a relational answer to a relational question. I am here to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. I like the last part of that answer. I don't know that we would typically read that in a contemporary book on what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to enjoy God forever.
What does it mean to enjoy Him forever?
Well, that's a good question. And so let's think about that a little bit. You'll have to wrestle with that some on your own. But I would say that one of the things that we learn from our faith and from the Bible and from our Christian faith is that God is a relational being. Mm-hmm. The doctrine of the Trinity says that God is one God who expresses Himself in three persons: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And so we believe that in some mystical way, here is a being who has interacted relationally with Himself forever. And so He is by His very nature a relational being. The creation that we're a part of, although it's a deep mystery to us, and we've wrestled some with this whole idea of, what the universe is all about and how did it start, and however you believe that human beings ended up here. If there is a great cause, whatever you call that great cause, we use the word God. What if that great cause created for a relationship with us, because He is this relational entity? And since we are created in His image, and since our primary identity is that we are His beloved children, then who we are and why we are here has to do with having that relationship with Him, that we seek this out. And so that would be the idea of enjoying Him forever. If we go back to our three examples then, if you are a naturalist and you don't think that there is any individual entity who is the great cause, whether you call that the force or God or whatever, then why are you here has nothing to do with being in relationship and enjoying a relationship with this eternal being. You're here to take up space as long as you're here, and then you're not here. But then I would ask, why is it that there's something inside of you? I believe if you're honest with yourself, and when I'm honest with myself, why is it then that there's something inside of us, I think, that longs for that relationship, that wants to reach out to the stars and know what's out there, what that great cause is?
I'm going to butcher this, but I think C.S. Lewis said in one of his books, maybe it was The Problem with Pain, but basically the idea that if you look at the universe and how nature works, you would never come to the logical conclusion that there is a loving God out there. Mm-hmm. So he says, like, just the notion that there is one is something that is like almost, he sees it as like evidence that there is, in fact, a God, that there is that longing, like nothing about the way the universe works and bangs and explosions and all this stuff. But yet there's something in us that, like you said, longs for that.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild.
That longing itself becomes the evidence, in a sense. Yeah. It's like that song, Dan, that
Beulah Land.
You were trying that we were trying to figure out who sang it and who wrote it.
Oh, I've already forgotten.
Just prayed to a God that I don't believe in.
Yeah.
That line. I believe that songwriter, I think he's being very, very honest. What is it in us that reaches out to a God that we may claim that we don't even believe in? Now, we can, give lots of good explanations for that. But the one that the Bible gives, and the one that our faith tradition has given down through the many hundreds and thousands of years, is that there is actually somebody to have that relationship with.
So is that the same as our purpose? Is that the meaning of life, then, to have a relationship with this Creator?
Yeah, that would be half of what the Catechism says.
Okay. To
enjoy Him forever. Let's call that the relational part of it.
Okay.
Let's go back then, since we have given these three different answers for the who am I, let's do the three different ones for the why am I here. Religion tends to funnel us more into kind of a utilitarian answer to that question. I'm here to appease that God, whoever He is. I'm here for the utilitarian purpose of getting that God appeased so that I can get the outcome that I want, which is for Him to bless my crops or for Him to take me to heaven when I die, whatever. But religion tends to not funnel us in the direction of thinking about a joyful relationship with that entity. Mm-hmm. But if we can rise above our religion, whatever it is, get past that utilitarian aspect of it, and allow ourselves to live more in this childlike state of, I'm a beloved child of God, and I'm here, at least in part, to have a joyful relationship with my Creator.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I had some free time this week. Mm-hmm. Maybe I thought I was asking this question of why am I here, but I think maybe the question I was asking was what now, or what do I do next? Yeah. So if you have started this relationship with God, what does that look like on a daily basis? You wake up, and why are you here?
Why am I here today?
Or Monday, week from Monday, or whatever.
Yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you think that maybe what you would maybe be thinking about in terms of what you've been wrestling with this week would be more in the sense of your calling for right now in your life? Or
yeah, maybe I was just you're trying to find a purpose, in some of this stuff. We do so much, ancient humans were even more so in this way, just trying to survive. You have to do things. It's not like the old days. I don't have to fight off woolly mammoths or anything like that. But we have to go to work, and we have to do things that we have to do to survive, right? To take care of ourselves and our families. But often there just doesn't feel like a lot of purpose in it. And so if I'm hearing what you're saying, there should be, if we're in touch with that relational aspect. Because then it doesn't really matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because you know who you are, and you know why you're here, because you have this relationship. But it sure does feel oftentimes kind of empty and meaningless in some ways.
Yeah. It can be a real struggle. I think that, again, going back to our statement from the Catechism, the Westminster Catechism, it starts off saying that man's chief end is to glorify God. And the other part of the statement is to enjoy him forever. So I believe that there is a very functional part of the answer to that question. To glorify God. Well, that's kind of vague. I mean, that's a word we don't use much. What does glorify mean? What does glory mean? Well, one way to think about that is simply to reflect the beauty of God. A good synonym for the glory of God is the beauty of God. That's why Jesus perfectly glorified God, because Jesus perfectly reflected the beauty of who God is. Somebody asked Jesus one time, what's the two great commandments? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he said, the second commandment is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so the answer that Jesus would get, why am I here? Jesus said, if you can do those two things, that's your functional part of it, to love God and then to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that Jesus would say, in whatever aspect of life you're doing, to do those two things, and in doing that, we reflect the beauty of who God is.
I asked a buddy of mine, he's a minister, Jason Blanton, and I asked him what he thought about the question of why I'm here, and I just thought I'd summarize kind of what he said, but it tied back into the creation story. I just found that interesting that your responses were kind of similar, but it was that we were caretakers of this creation, and that there was a communal aspect of it, that we are to be in like a community with creation, with God, with each other.
Yeah.
And that was kind of his short and sweet answer to why I'm here. And I made fun of him for that. And then anyway.
Well, I totally agree with him.
No, he's a good dude. He's a good dude.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right about that. I think that sometimes, Dan, we're looking for some kind of lofty answer to those questions, and we feel like that somehow in our day in and day out mundane lives, to some extent, the daily grind, we call it, that we're not getting to the answer to why am I here, you know? And I think that's where our angst comes from. It's not so much trying to find that vocation that seems to be more spiritual or makes a bigger difference in the world, or that's a more overt expression of loving our neighbor as ourselves. But it is, in whatever capacity we're functioning in that capacity, living in that vein of thought, living in that relationship with God, so that everything that we do day in and day out, or ideally everything that we do day in and day out, becomes just this almost instinctive expression of our love for God, our love for neighbor. There's a story about a monk named Brother Lawrence. He lived in the 1600s, true story. He kept a diary, and then from his diary, a book was compiled, I think, after his death, and the book was entitled The Practice of the Presence of God.
Okay.
But Brother Lawrence really struggled with this, what you're struggling with, and what a lot of people what I've struggled with too, because his job as a monk in the monastery was to wash dishes. That's what he did. Every day, Brother Lawrence got up, said his prayers, went and washed dishes all day long. And he felt like there's got to be more.
Right.
I'm not,
I hate washing dishes.
Yeah, exactly. And how is this fulfilling my calling? But he remained faithful to do it, and he remained faithful to say those prayers and to reflect and to grow in his relationship with God. And he came to this place of having a deep sense of peace with his vocation. And he would go wash his dishes, and as he would wash the dishes, he would do that, and the prayer on his heart that he wanted to do that in a way that brought glory to God. And the irony of it is, the weird thing about it, maybe not so weird, is that he became known as this person who possessed a great sense of peace. So much so that people began to seek him out. people would come to him. He's standing there washing dishes. People would come to him, though, and ask him, where is this sense of peace derived from? And his life became this living, breathing, visible expression of glorifying God. He was reflecting the beauty of God in the peace that he possessed. And he's standing there washing dishes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? So why we are here, the answer to that question must go deeper than what am I doing vocationally?
Right. That's right. Because here's a guy who's a dishwasher, and we're still talking about him hundreds of years later.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is Questioning Christianity, and we welcome your comments and your questions. Hit us up on Facebook, facebook.com/questioning Christianity. And we're glad you're here with us. We're talking about why am I here? I read a book earlier, let's see, I don't know, it's been a couple months, but it's by Viktor Frankl. You ever heard of him?
Oh, yeah.
And Man's Search for Meaning. He's a Holocaust survivor. And so I read this book, and I thought he was going to explain to me what the meaning of life was. And then I got to the end and realized he didn't know either. No. Well, the one takeaway was that it was the search for meaning that was the meaning, in a way. You know, I don't know if that really brings me a whole lot of peace or not. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it just doesn't resonate.
Yeah.
But
Do you ever think, Dan, that as adults, we try to figure things out, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's part of what this is all about.
Right.
We're wrestling with these questions. We're trying to engage. We're trying to live in tension with these questions. But that's one reason why you and I have said from the beginning that we want this podcast not so much to be about us dispensing answers, but we want to engage with the listeners as they wrestle and live in tension with these questions. Mm-hmm. But I believe that sometimes we need to embrace our child self and just let ourselves be childlike in our trust of God and in our joyful relationship with God. I was thinking about this for myself. I was trying to re-grasp my own joyful relationship with God. And believe it or not, preachers have to do that too. And I was thinking about my relationship as when I was a kid, my relationship with my parents. And I had a good relationship with my parents. It wasn't perfect, but it was a good relationship. And maybe you come from a situation where your relationship with your parents wasn't good, and this example won't work for you. But for me, I thought about a couple of things that helped me with this. One was like when my dad would come home from work. I would, as a kid, and even before I was old enough to go to school, I remember I would just wait with eager anticipation for my dad to pull up in the driveway. And I would run out to the truck. And sometimes he might have something for me in his lunchbox, and sometimes he might not. But I would just run out to the truck, and I remember, my dad picking me up and hugging me, and I remember how he smelled, and just all these senses that come flooding back to me, and just the joy of that moment of letting my dad kind of take me up in his arms and hug me. And I know it's not a perfect correlation, but I think there's a correlation there between that and the way that we can think about just this joyful relationship with. And why was I there? What was my purpose?
Oh, yeah.
Just to enjoy my dad, that's it. What was he thinking about my purpose? It wasn't a utilitarian thing, although he gave me chores to do, but it was for us to enjoy one another. Same thing with my mom. I remember, if you'll indulge me a little bit, I'll tell a story about my relationship with mom. I was a major mama's boy.
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't go to daycare. I didn't have sleepover at friends' houses when I was a kid until I was older. I think the first time that I ever actually left my mom for a full day was my first day going to school, going to kindergarten.
Okay.
And I did not handle it well. I cried. I got physically sick. I would get physically sick at school. And my mom, she was just in tears. She didn't know what to do. So one day she said, let's try this. She said, I'm going to put a picture of myself in your lunchbox. She wrapped it up. I remember she wrapped it in cellophane paper. And she said, you just think about, when you eat lunch, you'll get to open your lunchbox and you pull out a picture of me, and that'll remind you of me, and that you'll get to see me when you get home. And I did that. And I know that sounds corny and weird, but it just, and why was that? Just because of the joyful relationship I had with my mom. My mom, by the way, when I was in high school, I was still a mama's boy. And she made me a pair of gym shorts one time. She used to make almost all the clothes that I wore.
Well, you had to do that sort of thing in the Depression.
I know. Back in 1909.
So gym shorts, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. I bet they look pretty slick.
They look good. She was a good seamstress.
Yeah.
But in the waistband, she sewed in a tag that said "handmade for Mama's little boy," which would not have been problematic had I just kept those gym shorts in my locker and went straight to my locker. But the way that worked in our school, we had what they called the cage, and everybody had to keep their clothes in these boxes inside the cage. And they had designated people who you'd go to the cage and they'd go to your box and get your clothes out and hand them to you through the door. I don't know why that was. So
sounds like very high security for gym clothes.
Yeah, very unsanitary. And it was a coveted job for some reason, handling other people's dirty stuff.
Hey.
But anyway, so one of these guys who happened to be on the football team with me looked down and he saw my shorts and the tag in my shorts. Helton's got a pair of gym shorts that his mother handmade for him, her little boy. And so that did not end well. Back then, I wasn't a pacifist, and so
I see.
It was not good. But anyway, I love my mother. Why are we here, Dan? We're here to enjoy our relationship with God, to love Him, to love our neighbors as ourselves, to, as your friend said, to steward this creation that we're part of, and that's it. Now, I think we can do that in any vocation, in any walk of life. We just have to let ourselves live into it.
I think the relationships with others, obviously we get that. Even the relationship or the stewardship with the environment, we get that. I mean, that makes perfect sense. But for some of us, Rob, I think the idea of a relationship with God seems very abstract.
Yeah.
Is there a way to kind of explain what it is that you mean by a loving relationship with God, or one that brings you joy?
Yeah. Well, I think as Brother Lawrence did, the reason this book was written, it ended up with this title, The Practice of the Presence of God. Every day of his life, he practiced the presence of God. He believed that he lived moment by moment in God's presence, and he would see God and interact with God in every capacity in life. So how does that work? I think we learn to see God in other human beings. We learn to see God in creation. We learn to see God in lots of different ways that the world is evolving and becoming a better place. I know there are a lot of ways that we look at the world and maybe we don't feel like we see God. But I think that those are the ways that we learn to enjoy our relationship with God. Then I think that there are some really practical tools that we can use. One that I use is called the Daily Office, where I every morning I read a prescribed set of scripture readings, and I say prayers that are prescribed. I pray some of my own prayers, just spontaneously praying my own prayers, but I also pray prayers that have been handed down to me from other Christians down through the ages that help me become spiritually formed into the kind of person who can practice the presence of God moment by moment. So these are a couple things we can do.
And I've got one last question before we wrap up for today. You were talking about trying to recapture some of that childlike joy, or thinking about things like a child. So when when you were telling some stories about your childhood, I was thinking about my own, and you just didn't worry about a lot of this stuff as a kid, if you were blessed and had a good childhood and that sort of thing. So when these kind of questions and when these anxieties come, what do we just say, hey, man, let's go play basketball, or let's ride bikes, or, you just dismiss it, the anxieties, and know, hey, I'm a child of God and I'm here to, how did that go? The two parts, the glorify Him and to
enjoy Him forever. Yeah. I think that we can just simply go out and live life, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do think, though, that sometimes we can do that as a way of avoidance, and that's maybe not too healthy.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we have to step into these things that come into our lives, these questions that pop up, especially these deep existential questions, and then we have to process them. I think we do that as Christians. We do that through prayer best. I also think that meditation is a great tool. In the more recent years of Christianity, we've lost meditation as a tool, but it has been used down through the ages. In meditation, when the things that create anxiety in your life, when they come into your mind, in meditation, with your mind, you sort of see yourself as handing those things over to God, like physically. Okay, here's the bills that I cannot pay or whatever, and so I hand that over to God. Now I'm still going to have to deal with those things, but it helps me to process it by seeing myself, set it aside, and then come back to centering myself in God. So that's another, I think, helpful thing you can do.
I had a counselor one time that suggested I think about like this beautiful stream, and then there's like a leaf floating on the water, and whatever was you're struggling with, you kind of just like put it on that leaf and it goes. So it's like handing it over to God, but it's all mental, obviously, but it's almost like a physical thing where you can see that anxiety, that worry leaving. It's going around the bend. It's in His hands now.
Exactly.
And it's it does bring some comfort.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to talk about before we wrap up today? I hate to cut the episode off here, but I mean, your voice is amazing. I want to.
Yeah. Well, if I could do this every week, I would.
Yeah. It's been a fun episode. We hope that you guys will share and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Help us spread the word about the show. And then we really do want to hear from you. So send us your questions, send us your show ideas, your criticisms, your complaints, whatever's on your mind. We'd love to hear from you. And you can do that through our website, questioningchristianitypodcast.com. So that's going to wrap it up for today. For Rob Helton, I'm Dan McClellan. We'll see you next time on Questioning Christianity.